It started on a quiet evening, like any other. The gentle hum of the evening settled around us as I poured 2 glasses of wine, the soft clink of the glasses filling the room with a brief moment of lightness. We sat in our living room, side by side, the warmth of our shared space making it feel like everything was just as it should be. We had been married for 5 years, and I had come to know the rhythm of our days. There were moments of calm and others that were filled with laughter, but above all, there was a sense of comfort, a trust we had worked so hard to build. But that evening, as we sipped our wine, everything changed. He looked at me with a hesitant expression, one I hadn't seen before, as though he were carefully weighing his words. I set my glass down, the smoothness of the red liquid momentarily forgotten. His eyes held something, uncertainty, perhaps, but there was a tension there, too, that made my pulse quicken. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice careful, as though choosing his words with great deliberation. I nodded, but a sense of unease washed over me. I had no idea what was coming. I want to try something new," he continued, his eyes not meeting mine now, a nervousness creeping into his tone. "Something different for us." I leaned in, trying to catch his gaze, sensing that this wasn't just another one of his casual musings about life, as we sometimes had. This felt different, more significant. But I wasn't prepared for what came next. "I've been thinking about having intimacy with 2 women. Together." His words hung in the air, heavy and foreign. It was as though the room had suddenly tilted on its axis. I felt the weight of his request settle over me like a cold mist. I could hardly breathe, let alone respond. I searched his face for some sign that this was a joke, some indication that he wasn't serious. But his expression was one of quiet anticipation, like he was waiting for me to understand, to accept this as just another one of his curious whims. I felt a rush of confusion, followed by a sharp sting of betrayal. How could this be real? My mind raced to comprehend what he was asking. We had always discussed our relationship openly, talked about desires, boundaries, and trust. We had always agreed that respect and love were the cornerstones of our marriage. How could this be a part of that? His eyes met mine then, and I saw the flicker of doubt in them. But it was too late. The words had already been spoken, and the reality of his request was like a fracture, sharp and irreversible. I tried to speak, but my throat felt tight, the words trapped inside me. The wine glass in my hand felt strangely heavy, and I set it down with a gentle clink. I needed to process this, needed to find a way to make sense of it. But for the first time in our marriage, I didn't know where to start. It wasn't just the request itself that shocked me. It was the suddenness of it, the way it seemed to pull the ground out from under me. I had thought our connection was something sacred, built on years of shared experiences, and here he was, suggesting something that felt so foreign, so distant from the intimacy we had shared. As I sat there, struggling to find my words, I realized I was no longer sure who he was, or who I was in relation to him. In the silence that stretched between us, I could feel the distance growing, like a wall being built brick by brick. The marriage I had trusted in, the one I had always believed was built on mutual respect, now seemed like something distant, something I no longer recognized. This wasn't just about intimacy, it was about something deeper, something more fundamental. In that moment, I knew things would never be the same again. But what I didn't yet know was how I was going to navigate the storm that was now swirling inside me. The days that followed that evening were a blur. I went through the motions of our life together, but it all felt like it had been shifted just slightly out of place. The rhythm I had known so well, the quiet ebb and flow of our marriage, felt disjointed, foreign. Every time I glanced at him, I was met with the memory of his words, and the question kept echoing in my mind, why? Why this? Why now? I found myself sitting on the edge of our bed one night, staring at the floor. The room was silent except for the sound of my own breathing. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was broken. Something I had relied on, something I thought we had built together, now seemed fragile, brittle. Was this really the man I had married? The man I had trusted? Or was he someone else, someone I hadn't known before? It wasn't just the request itself. It was everything it implied. It was the sudden shift in the way I viewed him, the way I saw myself, too. Was I not enough? Was my love and the intimacy we had shared for years not enough for him? I couldn't help but wonder if it was something I had done, or failed to do. Had I not been the partner he needed? I found myself replaying our time together, searching for signs, trying to pinpoint when things had changed, when his desires had shifted so drastically. Had I missed something? Was I so caught up in my own understanding of our relationship that I didn't see the cracks forming until they were too wide to ignore? He had asked for something that, at its core, questioned the boundaries we had always set, those invisible lines that defined us as a couple. And in asking, he had made me feel small, as though my love, my devotion, was something easily set aside for the sake of an idea. A desire that, to me, felt not just inappropriate but alien. The more I thought about it, the more I questioned myself. Was it my failure to live up to some unknown expectation? Had I become complacent, unable to give him what he needed, what he desired? The self-doubt crept in, gnawing at me. I would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, and I could hear his voice again, clear as day, as though it was all I could focus on. I want to try something new. How could I reconcile those words with the love I thought we shared? I tried to talk to him, but every time I opened my mouth, I felt this tightness, this inability to truly express myself. I didn't know where to start. How could I explain the confusion, the hurt, without sounding judgmental or unloving? How could I tell him that what he wanted was something I couldn't provide, that it felt like a betrayal of everything we had built? It wasn't about the physical act itself, it never was. It was about something deeper, something that went to the very foundation of who we were together. What he was asking for wasn't just a change in our physical intimacy, it was a shift in the very meaning of our connection, a shift that I couldn't follow, and I didn't know if I wanted to. I knew that I needed to make a decision. But every time I considered that, I was paralyzed by the weight of it. What did it mean for me? For us? Was this something I could accept, or would it break us beyond repair? There was a growing sense of frustration, a deep ache inside me, as I realized that no matter how much I loved him, I couldn't change the fact that our desires, what we each valued, had somehow diverged so drastically. The pain of that realization was overwhelming, and as each day passed, I felt more and more like a stranger in my own life. The love I had for him was still there, but it was clouded now by uncertainty, by confusion, by this new distance. I wanted to believe that we could talk through it, that we could find a way to navigate this together. But the truth was, I wasn't sure anymore. I wasn't sure that I could meet him where he was, and I wasn't sure that he could meet me where I needed him to be. The struggle wasn't just with him, it was with myself. How could I reconcile my love for him with the realization that his desires no longer aligned with my own? How could I keep going forward with someone who had changed the very nature of our connection in a way that I couldn't follow? I knew I was standing on the precipice of something that could change everything. And as I sat in the silence, alone with my thoughts, I began to wonder if this would be the moment that defined the rest of my life. Would I be able to find a way to accept what had been asked of me, or would it force me to confront a truth I wasn't ready for? I had no answers yet. But I knew one thing for sure, I couldn't ignore the way I felt. And somewhere deep inside, I knew that the decision I was avoiding would soon demand to be made. The weight of the decision pressed down on me with each passing day. I went through the motions of our shared life, but it felt more like I was performing an act, playing a role in a play I no longer understood. We continued our conversations, but they were no longer easy or comfortable. Every word we exchanged felt like an echo of the moment when he had told me what he wanted, and that moment had altered everything. I tried to find clarity, to understand if there was a way forward, if we could somehow navigate this chasm between us, if I could meet him halfway. But the more I thought about it, the more it became clear that his request wasn't something I could ignore. It wasn't about being open-minded or adventurous, it was about the very nature of our relationship, the trust and respect I had thought we shared. What he was asking wasn't a small thing, it was a fundamental shift in what I believed our love was built upon. I found myself asking, was I being unreasonable? Was I too rigid in my understanding of what our marriage should be? But then I remembered the promises we had made to each other, the vows we took, not just in front of witnesses, but in the quiet moments of our life together. Our marriage was not a transactional exchange, and love was not something to be altered or redefined on a whim. He had asked for something that I could not provide, not because I didn't love him, but because it felt like a betrayal of what I held sacred. The idea of intimacy with two women was something I could not reconcile with my sense of self, my values, and my understanding of our bond. It was a breach of the very respect I had always believed was the foundation of our relationship. As the days wore on, I began to realize that the man I had married, the man I thought I knew, had changed. Or perhaps it was I who had changed. Perhaps I had grown in a direction he could no longer follow. But whatever the case, the more I thought about it, the more I understood that what he was asking for was not a simple difference in desire. It was a fundamental divergence in the way we viewed love, connection, and respect. The truth settled within me like a quiet storm. I could not continue in a relationship where the very essence of what I needed was not being met. His request was not just a one-time ask, it was a reflection of something deeper, something that I could not ignore. The love I once felt for him, so clear and unwavering, had been replaced with confusion and sorrow. The intimacy we had shared felt like a distant memory, something out of reach now. I had spent days, weeks, agonizing over this decision, weighing the impact it would have not just on me, but on everything we had built together. But I could no longer ignore the truth that was emerging. I needed to choose myself. I needed to walk away from a relationship that no longer reflected who I was, who I had become. It was a heart-wrenching realization. It wasn't easy to accept, and it wasn't something I had wanted. I had hoped we could find common ground, that we could rebuild the trust and intimacy we had once shared. But as the days passed, I saw that there was no bridge to cross, no middle ground that could make me feel whole again. The finality of my decision hit me in the quiet moments when I was alone. I had imagined this moment countless times, wondering how I would know when it was time to leave. And now, as I stood at the edge of that truth, I understood, I had to let go. The night I told him, sitting in the same living room where we had once shared so many quiet, loving moments, I could see the shock in his eyes. He didn't understand. He thought we could work through it, that time would change my mind. But it wasn't about time. It was about respect. It was about the recognition that what he wanted was not something I could provide. I looked at him one last time, the man I had once loved so fiercely, and I knew that it was over. I wasn't walking away out of anger, but out of necessity. I had to honor myself, my values, and my sense of self-worth. And so, with a deep breath, I said the words that had been building inside me for so long, I can't do this anymore. The silence that followed was deafening, and for a moment, I wasn't sure how to move forward. But deep down, I knew. It was the only choice I had left. I couldn't stay in a relationship that no longer held the love and respect I had believed in. I walked away that night, not with a sense of victory, but with the quiet resolve of someone who had finally made peace with a painful truth. The days after our conversation were the quietest I had ever known. The house, once filled with laughter and conversation, felt hollow. It was as though the walls were closing in on me, echoing the silence that had taken root between us. I moved through the motions of my life, but everything felt distant, as if I were watching from the outside rather than living in the moment. I had expected relief, but instead, there was a heaviness in my chest that I couldn't shake. The decision to walk away had been mine, and yet, in the stillness of the days that followed, I found myself questioning if I had made the right choice. I knew I had, deep down. But the path I had chosen was not without its sorrow. The love we had once shared, the connection that had been so strong, was gone. And though I had made the choice for myself, the sense of loss was undeniable. There were moments when I could still feel the pull of our past, his touch, his voice, the quiet comfort we had once shared. I would see an old photograph of us, and for a brief moment, I would remember what it had been like before all of this. Those memories felt so distant now, like something from another life. I wondered if he, too, felt the absence of what we had once built. But I didn't know. He had asked for something I couldn't give him, and the trust between us had shattered in a way that could not be repaired. I spent a lot of time reflecting on the relationship, the good times and the bad, the love we had, and the distance that had grown between us. It wasn't just his request that had driven a wedge between us, though it had been the final catalyst. It was the quiet realization that our desires, our needs, and our values had started to shift in ways that no longer aligned. The man I had married had changed, or perhaps, I had changed, and I didn't know how to bridge the gap that had formed. In the weeks that followed, I found myself growing stronger, more certain of my own identity. I had spent so much time in the shadow of our marriage, wrapped in the comfort of his presence, that I had forgotten what it meant to be truly alone, to be just myself, without the need to define myself through another person. The decision to divorce him had been painful, but it had also given me space to rediscover who I was, who I had always been, before I became someone else's reflection. I spent more time with friends, people who had known me long before him. We laughed, we cried, and they held space for me in ways that I hadn't allowed myself to be held before. I realized that, though the pain of the divorce still lingered, I was finding new pieces of myself. It wasn't easy. Some days, the sadness would flood back, and I would feel the weight of the loss again. But it was different now. It wasn't the crushing despair of uncertainty, it was a quiet, manageable grief that I could carry. One evening, a close friend asked me how I was doing, and for the first time in weeks, I was able to answer truthfully. "I'm okay," I said, and it was more than just words. I had taken the time to understand my own feelings, to allow myself to heal, and I had come to realize that I had done the right thing for myself. Walking away from him hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. It had been an act of self-respect, even if it had come at the cost of a love that once felt so real. But now, as I moved forward, I understood that love, in all its forms, would look different in the future. It wouldn't be a love defined by compromise, by losing myself in the process of trying to meet someone else's desires. It would be a love built on mutual respect, honesty, and the freedom to remain true to who we each were as individuals. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, I embraced my independence more fully. I found solace in the quiet moments, sitting by the window with a cup of tea, walking through the park by myself, listening to the sounds of the world around me. It was a different kind of peace, one I hadn't known before, and though I still felt sadness at times, I felt empowered in a way that I hadn't in years. I had let go of a relationship that no longer served me, and in doing so, I had made room for something new, something unknown but filled with possibility. The pain of the divorce was still there, but it was no longer the defining part of my story. I was writing a new chapter, one where I was learning to trust myself again, to love myself in ways I hadn't before. And while I would always cherish the memories of what had been, I had come to understand that sometimes, letting go is the only way to make room for the life that is waiting for you. It's strange how life continues even when you feel as though time should pause for a moment, allowing you to catch your breath. There were days when the grief of the divorce seemed like a shadow that lingered, but there were also days when the sun felt warmer, brighter, as if life itself was reminding me that there was still so much ahead. I had no grand plan. I wasn't rushing into anything new. In fact, I had come to understand that for the first time in many years, I didn't need to have it all figured out. I could simply be. I could explore life without the constant expectation of pleasing someone else, of trying to fit myself into a mold that wasn't mine to begin with. There was a quiet satisfaction in embracing the small moments. A morning jog through the park, the feeling of cool air against my skin. The warmth of a coffee cup in my hands as I sat at a small cafe, watching the world bustle around me, all while I was wrapped in the comfort of solitude. These were the things that had eluded me before, not because I hadn't had the time, but because I hadn't allowed myself to truly experience them. I had always been so focused on the we, that I had neglected the me. My friends noticed the change in me. They said I looked lighter, like I had shed a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but rather a slow unfolding of myself, a rediscovery of who I was when I wasn't defined by my relationship, by the expectations of another person. The emotional space I had created gave me room to think. Room to look back with clarity. I saw the good in the relationship, the laughter, the adventures, the way we had once truly understood each other. But I also saw the cracks that had formed over time, the parts of me that had been lost in an effort to hold things together when they were already fraying. I saw the moments when I had allowed myself to be something I wasn't just to keep the peace. And now, with the divorce behind me, I could see clearly the difference between the love that was healthy, that nurtured both partners, and the love that had, at some point, turned into an expectation. I thought about the future, about what it might hold. I couldn't predict it. I didn't need to. But I was ready for it. I knew now that the most important relationship I would ever have was the one with myself. I had to be true to my own heart, to my own values. I had to trust that whatever came next would align with that truth. I would allow myself to love again, in time. But not until I was whole. Not until I had learned to love myself fully, without relying on someone else to complete me. I had learned, through the pain of my marriage's end, that true love begins with self-love and respect. Until I could stand on my own 2 feet with unwavering confidence, would not seek love from others, only from within. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of doubt, moments where I missed the comfort of his presence. But those moments were fleeting. The weight of those doubts grew lighter as I walked further down this new path. I learned to embrace the silence without fear, to sit with myself and know that I was enough, just as I was. And so, I moved forward. With every step I took away from the past, I felt more grounded in who I was becoming. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I was learning to face it with open arms. There would be challenges, no doubt. But there was also a vast expanse of possibility, and that was enough for me. In the end, I realized that the hardest part wasn't the pain of letting go, or the struggle of facing the truth. It was the courage it took to embrace a future that was unknown, to trust that by walking away from what wasn't meant for me, I was creating space for everything that was. I had walked through fire, and though the scars remained, they were no longer a symbol of defeat. They were a testament to my strength. I had survived, and now, I was ready to live. As I read through her story, I couldn't help but feel the weight of every word, every choice, every emotional shift she described. There's something about her journey that resonates deep within, something universal about the pain of betrayal, the loss of love, and the profound courage it takes to choose oneself over everything else. I felt the shock in the first chapter when her husband, the person she thought she knew, asked for something so far removed from the relationship they had built together. The way her world tilted off its axis, how her trust was shattered in a single moment, I could almost feel that same confusion, that sinking realization that everything she thought was solid and secure was, in fact, fragile. It's so hard to imagine how it must have felt for her. She never saw it coming, never imagined that the person she had committed herself to could change so drastically. In the second chapter, her struggle with her emotions hit me hard. The self-doubt, the questioning of her worth, it's painful to witness, even from the outside. It's like watching someone you care about slowly lose themselves in the aftermath of a heart-shattering revelation. We've all been there, in one way or another. The temptation to blame ourselves, to think we're somehow at fault for someone else's choices, is a weight that no one should carry. But we do. She did. And I felt that with her. And then, the decision to walk away. I could feel her heart breaking as she made that choice. It was clear she loved him. But I also felt the quiet, steadfast strength in her decision. Walking away from someone you once loved, someone you thought you would grow old with, isn't just difficult, it's transformative. She chose to protect herself, her boundaries, and her self-worth. The emotional pain of that decision, yet the clarity it brought her, was something that struck me to the core. It's so easy to stay in a toxic situation, to try to fix it, to make it work. But she knew, in the deepest part of her soul, that she couldn't compromise herself any longer. That strength, that commitment to herself, is something I deeply admire. By the time I reached the final chapter, I could feel her slowly healing. It's as though, through each moment of self-reflection and growth, she was putting together the pieces of her heart again, reclaiming herself. The quiet moments of peace she found, the simple joys she learned to savor, they're the kind of things I think we all take for granted. She learned to love herself, to embrace solitude not as loneliness but as freedom, as space to grow into something stronger. There's an undeniable sadness in her story, yes. But there's also a sense of empowerment, of reclaiming her life, her choices, her identity. It's a reminder of how important it is to never lose sight of who we are, even in the face of someone else's desires, no matter how much we love them. I think, by the end of her journey, she's become someone I deeply admire, someone who faced a heartbreaking situation and chose to move forward, not because it was easy, but because it was the right thing to do for herself. And I can't help but feel moved, almost inspired, by that courage. Her story is raw, real, and undeniably human. It's about love, loss, and finding the strength to move on. It's a reminder that sometimes, the hardest choices lead to the most powerful transformations. And it leaves me with a sense of hope, that even after the hardest moments, there's room for new beginnings, for a future that's still full of possibility.